listening to the Bible 126 show.
This episode is brought to you by Shopify. Forget the frustration of picking commerce platforms when you switch your business to Shopify, the global commerce platform that supercharges your selling wherever you sell. With Shopify, you'll harness the same intuitive features, trusted apps, and powerful analytics used by the world's leading brands. Sign up today for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/tech, all lowercase. That's shopify.com/tech.
Hello, everyone. This is the first in a series of podcast conversations that I hope to conduct into the foreseeable future. And on this maiden voyage, I am delighted to be joined by my friend and colleague, Joe Allen, to talk about transhumanism. Many of you will recognize Joe from Steve Bannon's War Room podcast. Aside from being Mr. Bannon's correspondent on the topic of transhumanism, Joe is a contributing writer for several prominent publications, including The Federalist, The American Spectator, and The American Thinker, to name a few. Joe will also be joining me as a guest speaker at the Birthright Conference that I am hosting this year from the 6th through the 7th of May in Nashville, Tennessee, where we will be discussing transhumanism, aliens, UFOs, and Bible prophecy. Tickets to the conference are now on sale at a 20% discount. I expect these tickets to sell out fast. So if you're thinking about attending, hurry over to my website, timothyalberino.com, or follow the link in the description of this video to secure your tickets today. Joe, you recently published a captivating and amusing article with the provocative title, Transhumanism is Satanism with a Brain Chip. I should like to begin by reading an excerpt from the article. Technology has inspired a dark religion, obsessed with power. This is mechanical sorcery for the modern adept on the go. Through its miracles, the naked ape is granted clairvoyance, weather apps, telepathy, texting, remote viewing, surveillance cameras, deadly curses, autonomous drones, and even tantric rites, sex bots. Transhumanists are reaching for loftier powers, though. Virgin birth from artificial wombs, virtual astral planes, sentient social robots, and deified artificial intelligence. Time magazine's Transhuman of the Year, Elon Musk, warned that the runaway advance of artificial intelligence is, quote, summoning the demon. Worried that Homo sapiens will soon be overshadowed, Musk is pouring money into an implantable brain-computer interface, Neuralink, so we may commune with this AI deity. Looking far down the road, the most ambitious transhumanists long to transcend death itself through radical life extension, or even mind uploading, the replication of your soul's pattern in immortal silicon. It's like Instagram, only forever. Anytime the gods demand sacrifice and devotion, transhumanists demand immediate gratification. If that means storming the gates of heaven with brain implants and hoverboards, then so be it. Joe, in your article, you go on to cite the transhumanist philosopher Max Moore, Aleister Crowley, Anton LaVey, and even the Satanic Temple. What is the association between these self-styled Satanists and transhumanism?
You know, Timothy, I think the connection is implicit in some cases, so that the connection, say, between Anton LaVey and transhumanism is tangential. LaVey famously advocated the creation of android companions. He had himself created a small cadre of, semi-android companions around his home. And until the end of his life in the late 90s, he advocated pretty seriously using artificial humans as surrogates for the Satanist desire for gratification, right? selfish impulses, sexual impulses, this sort of thing. And his successors discussed it as well. They were actually pretty triumphant when the real doll took off, and they associated that really with the sort of conceptual templates that LaVey had put down. But then when you're talking about Aleister Crowley, and especially as the sort of occult threads culminate in Timothy Leary and a lot of the more, occult-inflected techno music, you start to see direct inspiration, a sort of, cultural lineage going back to Crowley and ending, today, but really one of the flashpoints was Timothy Leary. I mean, at one point, Timothy Leary claimed to be the reincarnation of Aleister Crowley. He in his famous article, it's Digital Polytheism, Load and Run Techno-Paganism, I believe is the title, or maybe I have that backwards. It's a lengthy, wordy title. But he argues very clearly that the personal computer is the realization of the ancient alchemical aspirations to fuse opposites and to gain power for oneself. And in particular, he traced the personal computer back in a somewhat artful way to Aleister Crowley's ritual magic formulas. And, in particular, the realization of one's will. The personal computer allows for the realization of personal drives of any sort, under Crowley's paradigm, without any moral constraint. And I think that Leary would probably somewhat agree with that. But then, maybe more importantly, the sort of reflection of powers that were promised by the early ritual magicians and alchemists that were realized then through technology, as listed in the article, telekinesis. And this is largely drawing from Leary, telekinesis, clairvoyance, precognition, telepathy. All of these sorts of powers are realized through technology. And I think that strain in general, whether it references back directly to Crowley or Leary, that strain of thought is very prominent among transhumanists. So, maybe one of the more important figures that I discuss in the article is H.R. Giger. And, he's a visual artist. He's not a philosopher. In one of the collections that I have of his, Leary actually wrote the foreword. And Giger's work, more than anything I've ever seen in person, embodies the dark, sort of self-motivated, satanic materialist impulse behind technological development and human fusion with technology. He does it very honest way. He's not in any way concealing his motives or concealing his inspiration, and it is quite overtly satanic. Now, the article itself is some mixture of tongue-in-cheek and being dead serious. I'm dead serious about that connection, but at the same time, it's a matter really of essence and not necessarily of particularities, so that most transhumanists would never call themselves Satanists or really want to associate with it in any way. They probably think it's as superstitious as Christianity or any other religion. But I think that you can definitely generalize from the sorts of impulses that are, made explicit by Max Moore, the arc transhumanist, and also tie that to some of the more essential messages that you find in alchemy and the occult.
Who is Max Moore? Because you have some incredible quotations from Max Moore in your article, quotations that I had not seen before. In fact, let me read one of those quotations and then tell us who Max Moore is and how many people in the transhumanist movement agree with him. So you have in your article here that you cite an essay of his entitled "In Praise of the Devil," published in Atheist Notes. And this is the transhumanist Max Moore, who published this in 1991. This article is written in praise of Satan, Lucifer, the devil, or whatever you want to call him. I am quite serious on a symbolic level in what I write, but my statements praising the devil and attacking Christianity, God, and Jesus are not to be taken as implying the real existence of any of these supposed beings. Lucifer means light bringer, and this should begin to clue us in to his symbolic importance. Lucifer is the embodiment of reason, of intelligence, of critical thought. He stands against the dogma of God and all other dogmas. He stands for the exploration of new ideas and new perspectives in the pursuit of truth. So, Joe, who is Max Planck? Max Planck. That's a different discussion. That's a discussion on quantum physics. Who is Max More? And how many people agree with him? How many people are in his stream of transhumanism?
Max More is one of the most influential writers in the transhumanist movement. I would say that, especially among younger transhumanists today that I read, not many of them agree with him wholeheartedly. He was really a firebrand. I disagree with his premises. I disagree with most of his conclusions. But I have a sort of grudging respect for the guy because, from the beginning, he basically came out of the gates with middle fingers flying, and I think that was the impetus behind his essay in praise of the devil. But what in my mind, he's both delusional and he's playing with fire. I mean, he's talking about Lucifer as a symbol, and he is tearing into God and Jesus as symbolic realities. And while I agree that those symbolic realities are sort of windows into the deeper elements that exist in the universe, for him, it's all a vacuum after that. And it's just a matter of what a human being can do to harness this sort of imagery, to harness human intellect, to harness human critical thought in service of one's own power. I would say that on a very broad level, transhumanism is a materialist inversion of all spiritual aspiration globally, Christianity in particular. But I think that, all traditional religions seek some degree of sacrifice within the soul, within the individual, to a greater force, to a force that's always portrayed as good, however different it may be from religion to religion. Max More and many transhumanists in general completely reject that. They begin with a materialist premise. Nature is all there is and is sufficient unto itself. We are floating quite haplessly on a dirt ball in the backwater of the Milky Way galaxy. We're all doomed to die, and death inevitably means oblivion. So with Moore in particular, especially with his Alcor Life Extension Foundation, which he's the president emeritus and has been a leading figure there. His quest, and by and large the quest shared by many transhumanists, is to stave off death indefinitely, to make death a choice. He, in a recent conference that I viewed, via the internet, I couldn't make it because of certain restrictions to get across the border to Spain. But, he was talking about living 2,000 and 3,000 years. And it's astonishing to me that anyone would be so delusional. I mean, I know that technology is advancing rapidly, and I know that more than likely life expectancy will be extended dramatically in the next 50 years if everything progresses as it has. But that really highlights the sort of insane aspiration that is boiling in the depths of the transhumanist mind. The notion of a 3,000-year lifespan beginning, in the 50s or 60s, it's beyond me. Ray Kurzweil obviously is even more ambitious with his predictions. So, but yeah, that's Max More. If I could bring up one more thing about him, I know I've gone perhaps over long, but Max More, it was really the originator of the concept of extropy. And extropy, is positioned as the opposite of entropy. And the cosmic vision of the purely naturalist mind is that the universe is running down. Eventually we'll be down to just a fraction above 0 Kelvin, at which point everything is oblivion. And Max More, harnessed this notion of extropy as a materialist means to overcome entropy. But I would say that one of the hallmarks of transhumanism, if not the hallmark, is an inability to reconcile oneself to death in the material realm.
I think that's very insightful. But don't you think that Max Moore was just saying the quiet part out loud?
Yes.
When he was acknowledging that this, at the core of transhumanism, what you have is, in fact, Luciferianism. And again, Luciferianism is, from my perspective, from a Christian perspective, Luciferianism is the inversion of the gospel of Christ. So, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with this, Joe, but Luciferians view the God of the Bible, who they call Adonai. They see him as the villain. And so when they look at the story of the Garden of Eden, of Adam and Eve and the serpent, they see Adonai as being the slave master, that Adonai enslaved mankind, and that the serpent was the benefactor of mankind. He was the friend of man, the dragon, the serpent, and he was enlightening mankind. So he wanted to break the chains. He wanted to unshackle humanity and confer his wisdom and his understanding to mankind. And I believe that from the Luciferian perspective, the ultimate goal in the Luciferian perspective is to apotheosize, is to reach apotheosis. And apotheosis means to become deified, to become like God.
The connection you make with the serpent in the garden, I mean, that really, I've never really been able to trace a direct lineage. I know that a lot of kind of Luciferian or occultist types draw on the Gnostic tradition and have since before the discovery of the Gnostic Gospels. But in those Gospels that have been discovered at Nag Hammadi and elsewhere, there is that strong narrative that kind of inverted narrative of the Eden story, and I guess that really again highlights how ancient that notion is. The Gnostic concept that Jehovah is the evil one and created the world incomplete or flawed, and that the serpent in fact represented what would eventually be Jesus incarnate, or the divinity, depending on the text. It highlights how ancient that really is. One finds certain associations all the way back into Egyptian funerary rites. However loose those connections may be. Transhumanism is not a new thing philosophically, but the technologies that have come into play in the last century and a half, or maybe you could really look at the acceleration after the computer took off in the 90s. Transhumanism provides both actual capabilities for enacting one's will, so to speak, in reality, but maybe more importantly, it allows for far more dramatic dreams to come to fruition culturally. Tons and tons of people believe Elon Musk when he says that artificial intelligence will soon surpass human capabilities, or that tons of young men, I think, probably would be willing to take the chip back here, or maybe the best one would be right here on the pineal. I don't know, but it's astonished me more than the technological progress itself. It's astonished me the extent to which culturally these norms have been accepted as fantasies in some sense, but they have formed a replacement for traditional religious worldviews. It is adopted to varying degrees by varying people. But, when I think about transhumanism, I try to think of three levels. I think about that aspiration, right? The aspiration to create a conscious, a sentient artificial intelligence, or the aspiration to perfect the human genome. And then just behind that, you've got the doctors and scientists and lab technicians, millions of people who are working on these things without probably any strong concept that you would associate with transhumanism, or if they do think that way, it's periodic and it's, maybe within their own sphere. And these people, by and large, are just working away, trying to better human life. They're trying to help people live longer. They're trying to increase communication capabilities, these sorts of things. And then you have the corporate and governmental application of these things. And it's, I guess you could place that somewhere between the actual capabilities and the aspiration. But that's really where the rubber hits the road. So when Google is literally siphoning up all of your personal information through your emails or through your searches and feeding that to its artificial intelligence system, that system may or may not become conscious. But the fact that you're being surveilled, basically inside and out for that purpose is very real. And all of the programmers that worked on that may not have wanted some sort of technocratic dystopia. But that's where these aspirations become real ultimately, is through, the corporate initiatives or the government initiatives that bring it out into the public. If there's a moment, I just to explain to the audience my perspective on this, or how I see it, there's many ways you can, slice a pig up, but I have 5 categories that I examine transhumanism through. The first is, I guess initially I should say, all of them are rooted in evolutionary theory for the most part. That basically accepts Darwinian evolution, but there's also a strong element of, cultural evolution on top of the biological evolution. The notion that ideas or technologies or inventions, cultural modes, the idea that those are also under selection and are, evolving by way of many of the same or similar processes that biological evolution evolved through. A really great paradigm is Max Tegmark's Life 3.0, so that Life 1.0 is the biological substrate that leads up to human beings. And then after human beings, you have the creation of Life 2.0, the cultural mode. And that cultural mode has evolved in this viewpoint basically for the last 200,000 years, let's say, with a rapid acceleration with agriculture and even more rapid acceleration post-industrial revolution. And then you have Life 3.0, which comes at the cusp of that cultural evolution, which is artificial life, digital life, life in silicon. And it's this notion that the intelligence that is being in many ways realized in reality. This is real. Artificial intelligence, people are, snicker at it sometimes. The advanced artificial intelligence systems are astonishing. They may not be gods and they may not be conscious, but their abilities to recognize novel patterns it has an uncannily lifelike sort of feel to it. So when Tegmark talks about Life 3.0, he's literally talking about a new form of life that will be created by human beings on the planet. And so the 5 avenues, and I'll go through these quickly, the 5 avenues that I explore this through. Number 1 is eugenics. And I've shied away from the term, but the more I've thought about it, that's really the only way you can conceive of it, because it has direct lineage with Galton and Charles Davenport and the originators of the eugenics movement, who were by and large liberal, as we would conceive of it today. And transhumanists are obsessed with this notion of until, at least those who believe the body has any use until the super intelligence takes over, that they're obsessed with longevity, and they're obsessed with perfecting the human form at the genetic level, to increase intelligence, to increase beauty, to increase strength, all of the classic hallmarks of the eugenics movement. And that also applies on the cultural level of evolution, so that transhumanists in general are looking to create optimal cultural modes that will survive, they believe, in perpetuity. They believe that till the very last second when the universe runs out of steam. And the height of that is artificial life. The second is neuroenhancement, and neuroenhancement ranges from supplements to increase your cognition, to exercises to increase your cognition, to devices to increase your cognition and your sensory reach, and it's all the way down to some of the more extreme measures, such as deep brain stimulation in order to increase one's cognition, which actually shows some promise. And that goes back to kind of that eugenics notion. They are obsessed with intelligence and intellect. And so it's to be increased at all costs. I mean, you could arguably say that the metaverse, the loftiest aspirations of virtual reality falls under this, is this notion that you will be able to have kind of, superhuman sensory capabilities so that you can see in augmented reality, information overlaid on an otherwise, kind of dead and uninforming world. And then virtual reality itself is, the capacity to perfect human experience, to enhance one's neurological state to peak levels of pleasure. The third, bionics, is bringing that, the biodigital convergence, is bringing that into the body through chips, through sensors. The loftiest fantasy is to have actual robotic limbs that are more powerful than a human limb, or, the Neuralink or any other sort of brain-computer interface that's implanted to give you superhuman intelligence. And that's really, the center of cyborg culture that's already happening now, but they dream of in these incredibly sort of, science fiction tinged, delusional ways. The fourth is the concept of, robotics taking over human capacities out in the physical world. So that's anything from manufacturing to any other sort of workhorse robot that takes up human labor and leads to, in their mind, a post-scarcity world. And maybe the most important element in that is the social robot, that interface, that direct interface that human beings can have with an artificial intelligence system through, a human-like robot that you can relate to. But behind that is, something far more etheric, something more powerful, which leads us to the fifth sort of pillar or vector, after eugenics, neuroenhancement, bionics, and robotics, is artificial intelligence itself, in particular artificial general intelligence, and in the most aggressive predictions, artificial superintelligence. And that concept, the concept of a silicon-based digital mind that is in some way equivalent to a human or even animal mind, that is conscious, that is capable of feeling, that is capable of, extraordinary superhuman intellectual feats. And, eventually in the most dramatic sort of narratives, such as, say, Ray Kurzweil's singularity narrative, eventually this mind will become so overpowering that it will begin converting all usable matter in the universe into computronium, so that its consciousness, its reach, can spread out from the Milky Way forward, where either it'll take over the entire universe, or maybe it'll meet other superintelligences and begin competing like amoebas in space. But those windows, for me, it gives me an insight into, because there's so many different transhumanists, right? There's so many different schools of thought. There's so many different people who fall under transhumanist sort of ideological umbrellas that wouldn't call themselves transhumanists. But as you look at those different elements, and you look at the corporations and the individuals and the inventions that are occurring right now that drive them, I think for me anyway, it gives a fairly holistic spread as to what transhumanists are out to accomplish. And it also gives categories to see what the actual achievements are, technical achievements are, that are leading at greater or, lesser speeds towards those goals.
That's a very useful way to categorize these different elements of transhumanism. But I'm wondering where nanotechnology is going to fall in in terms of these categories, because the nanotechnology, I feel like we were hearing a lot about it some years ago, 5-10 years ago, and then and suddenly I'm not hearing so much, or maybe I'm just not reading the right articles or following the right transhumanists or futurists. But what are the developments in nanotechnology? And because nanotechnology is very interesting, it's a stream of technology all by itself, but it has application in so many other of these technologies that are developing concurrent with it. So where are we with nanotechnology? How do you see that merging into this transhumanist panorama?
Like I say, there's many ways to slice up a pig, so it's kind of arbitrary where you stick each Post-it note on the wall. But I think of nanotechnology just as an extension of robotics. Beginning with the ideas of Eric Drexler, and just going forward from there. The most impressive nanotechnology that I've come across in the last, say, 6-7 months, and mostly this has been, some of it's old news actually, but it's mainly been because people are constantly hitting me up asking me what to do about the nanobots in the vaccine.
Right.
And I'm working on a piece right now. The working piece is the Vax bots, easy to imagine, difficult to prove. And the reason it's so easy to imagine, DARPA has been funding these sorts of projects, consistently since the brain-computer interface, especially since the 60s. But they've moved into nanotechnology, and there are a number of projects that they're funding which seek to use small microscopic robots, swarms of them, to alter human consciousness. They would migrate to the brain and be controlled through electromagnetic patterns that would allow them to basically hijack the neurons and either change emotional states, change cognitive states. Ray Kurzweil discusses this a lot. His hope is that eventually it will be so exacting that you can realize virtual realities through nanobots in your brain. Neuralink's co-founder, his name evades me at the moment, but he has similar sorts of ideas like that, largely geared around larger hardware. But so there's the DARPA-funded projects that openly, there's not like a secret. They overtly seek to use microscopic robots in your brain to alter your consciousness and your abilities, but there's also on a more nuts and bolts level a great which is relatively speaking an impressive study out of Rice University where they're using nanobots to hijack the brains of flies, fruit flies more than likely, and it shows it shows great promise in the flies. They're able to, locate the proper neurons, activate them, deactivate them. They call it a non-invasive process. So instead of having to stick a chip in your brain, you're using nanobots that have been injected into your veins and are floating around your system, in order to alter consciousness. So or alter ability.
There's serious medical applications too implicated with the nanobots. I've read articles about the aspirations to create these nanobots, which for people who don't know are, and correct me if I'm wrong, Joe, they envision them being the size of cells and being able to move around.
Much smaller than cells.
Yes, yeah, right. So the size of cells are much smaller, to be able to roam around your body and repair your cells. To attack cancer cells, to get to do all kind of maintenance inside your body, but obviously the big concern with nanobots is somebody could interface with those nanobots remotely and have them do other things also inside of your body. They're just little machines. They're as you said, it does cross over with robotics. They're little robots that are moving throughout your anatomy, doing different functions. So there's a real concern that people have with nanobots being there's a whole lot of talk out there right now about those nanobots that you mentioned in the vax being able to be amplified or triggered or turned on, switched on, basically by 5G, I think is what the conspiracy is. And I don't believe that that's the case. I don't subscribe to the nanobots thing with the vaccine. However, I can envision a situation in the future in which if somebody willingly takes these nanobots and has these things roaming around their bodies, patrolling their vascular system or whatever, it's not difficult to imagine a scenario in which those nanobots can be hijacked, even hacked. My God, we have China hacking into our most critical systems here in the United States. We're getting cyber attacks every day by China and Russia. So, but people, loads of people walking around the earth filled with nanobots sounds like a really, really bad idea. On one hand, on the other hand, it sounds like there's a lot of promise there for medical application. If you can, instead of taking chemotherapy, for example, and basically killing all of your cells together, if you can swallow a pill or get an injection of nanobots that can specifically target and only target those cancer cells, well, that's a lot better than nuking your whole body with or nuking large portions of your bodies with radiation. So there's almost unimaginable medical application, but then there's also unimaginable application for depopulation, for warfare. One of the big concerns that I have regarding, and this is not science fiction. We're not musing about something that's for all intents and purposes impractical and impossible. This is something that is coming in the future.
Real quickly, my advisor at Boston University, a very brilliant man, whatever our disagreements may be, I'd asked him what he thought at one point earlier in the year in regard to advanced technology, what really is the cutting edge as far as the sci-fi wing. And he said nanotechnology. He's far more on top of that element than I am, for sure. And, he was fairly convinced within the next few years we'll be seeing people injected with nanobot swarms for the purposes you're talking about, in particular cancer and cell and tissue regeneration.
Yeah, and one of the real concerns is because nanobots are so small, they could be aerosolized, and people could be breathing them in. They could aerosolize them from a commercial jet flying over your house. And you could be inadvertently consuming these nanobots, breathing them in through your mouth and nose. You don't even have to be injected with them. Once they're inside of your body, they're like, they're little robots, and they're robots that have functions built into them, and they have certain functions that they can do and that they've been designed to do. But they can also be controlled. They can swarm together. They can do all kinds of things that they weren't initially intended to do. So what I'm saying is it's almost like we're going to be making our bodies, subjecting our bodies to the same kind of security concerns that our computers are subjected to right now, the hacking that we're seeing happening, in modern warfare, cybernetic warfare. So that same level of hacking, that same level of cybernetic warfare is going to be happening sometime in the future with human bodies, with the human anatomy. And that to me is exceedingly dangerous. And I don't, not to be too dystopic about it, but I don't see a way to stop that kind of technology from being produced and then being used in a nefarious way. You once you have the technology to create nanobots, you can't, it's not like something that you can detect easily. I'm sure they'll create scanners and all kinds of things that can detect the nanobots. But as I said, you could aerosolize you could aerosolize the nanobots and spray a whole community and program those nanobots to do God knows what. Like you were saying, swarm up into the brain and change the function of the brain and do all kinds of things. And as I talk about these disparate elements of transhumanism, it's like a big mess in my brain because there are so many different technologies in play. And they all and all of these different technologies they all cross over into each other at some point. And it's almost impossible for me to conceptualize the amalgamation of these technologies. And that's why the future is called the age that we're in, or some of them believe that we're entering the hybrid age, because we're seeing the hybridization of all these technologies coming together. And when these technologies come together, considering these technologies, each one separate, is mind-blowing. But when you think about what can be done when you pull them all together, when you have genetic modifications available for commercial use or military application, then you have the nanobot technology that can do all kinds of things. Then you have the cybernetics, you have the Neuralink, and you have the implants, and you have the different cybernetic technologies that are going to enhance human capabilities beyond what the genetics can do. I mean, we're going to get enhanced capabilities through genetic modification at some point in the future. And as I talk about in my book, there is a future human enhancement market, commercial market that's coming. And so we are going to see, and I don't know if you agree with me, but we are going to see at some time in the near future, and I don't know when, everybody's always off on their predictions as when these things are going to unfold. I mean, we were supposed to get the singularity by 2025, if I remember, correct?
He's pretty much, Ray Kurzweil has hung around 2045, 2049. That's
but I think originally though, didn't he adjust that? Because wasn't it?
Yeah, but what he's really predicted for, it also ranges 2025, 2030. Now I think he's landed at 2030, but that's artificial general intelligence. That's basically a computer simulation of a human brain, but with computer speed.
So that's pre-singularity.
Yeah, I mean, the singularity as a concept is, just for the audience, the singularity is simply that moment in time when technology has advanced so that it is outside of our ability to predict its behavior and therefore outside of our control. And there's really no way to see beyond the singularity as to what will happen. It's taken from the notion, the same, the mathematical singularity, or, in physics, the notion of, the kind of event horizon after which you can't calculate or see what's happening. And so the technological singularity, as it's articulated by Werner Vinge and Ray Kurzweil, is just a moment of convergence, technological convergence, beyond which there is simply no way to predict what will happen because human beings aren't going to be capable of controlling or comprehending it.
The reason why I asked you about nanotechnology, and the reason why I'm highlighting this emerging market, right, this commercial market for human modification, genetic, nanotech, everything, right? The Neuralink, everything, body, mind, and soul, basically. At some point in the future, we are going to be able to willfully modify ourselves to such a degree that we are, for all intents and purposes, no longer going to be the human species. And that is in fact the way I view transhumanism. It is a transition. The word transition is it's the notion of transition. The idea of a transition is built into the word, and that transition implies that we're going from human beings to something other than human beings. We are in their mind. We are transcending Homo sapien. We're becoming humanity 2.0, Homo Deus, the God Man. And not just maybe it's just going to be available for the elite. There's some scenarios out there that I've seen and articles I've read that this technology is being developed, but it's only going to be in the hands of the elite, the super rich, and that they're going to transcend, that they're going to consciously evolve into like these superhuman Sith Lord level dictators that are going to, they're going to have their compound on Mars or something and be like the movie Elysium. They're going to have their all of their technology somewhere on the moon or something like that, and the rest of us are going to be living in squalor. But then the other possibility is that all these technologies are going to be available to the general public, and I think that's where we're going. And certainly, the elite are always going to have access to everything first. I mean, all technologies start off really expensive and inaccessible to the masses, and then gradually come down. I mean, it's a function of Moore's law, and so. Right now, we have some of these technologies that we're talking about that are very likely already being used to some extent by some of the elite who have the money, who have the connections, who are willing to experiment on their bodies to try and attain life extension or eternal life. But I tend to believe, from my perspective, and maybe I'm wrong, and I could be dead wrong about this, but I tend to believe that we're going to see all of these technologies enter the commercial sector at some point in the future. And the reason why I'm so confident in that is because I see the trajectory of space travel. I see the trajectory of space tourism. If there was one thing that was completely out of reach for regular citizens, for people who weren't uber rich, it was to go in space. But and they will succeed. I was going to say, if Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk succeed in building, basically, I think in the beginning it's going to start off as people just going for joyrides, like William Shatner did recently with Jeff Bezos on Jeff Bezos' phallic-shaped rocket.
Yeah.
But that'll be how it starts, and it'll be the uber rich, and it'll be the celebrities and the politicians who get to go and do that. But I think that the idea is to build a space station, a hotel in orbit, basically, and gradually bring the price down so that space tourism becomes accessible. It'll still be expensive, of course, but ultimately, I think it will become accessible to the masses. And I believe that these technologies, that these biotechnologies are going to follow the same course. In the beginning, they're going to be available only to the elite, only to the super rich, and gradually they're going to become accessible to the masses. Now,
the metaverse is a clear indication of that, right? Like virtual reality, there have been pretty decent virtual reality systems around for a while. But once they worked out some of the smaller bugs, especially like tracking and being able to keep you from getting nauseous, you saw the Oculus begin to be marketed, and then of course Mark Zuckerberg tried anyway to snatch up the name metaverse. I mean, he'll have Meta, but everyone knows that the metaverse long preceded him. But you are seeing that there, that average kids, it's not quite Nintendo level yet. It's still Sega Genesis while everybody else has Nintendo. But I guess I should say, like, middle class kids who have a decent home can afford to have virtual reality that was only dreamt of in, even like the early 2000s.
You mentioned something that's really important that a lot of people don't think about when they think about transhumanism, and that is eugenics. Eugenics is at the heart of this thing, because what's going to happen when these technologies become accessible, and even if they only become accessible to the elite, this will still apply. But especially if these technologies become accessible to the general public, you are going to have a new social caste system. And I write about in the book, and I can't say it better than I wrote it, so I'm just going to read a quick paragraph here, and I want to get your commentary on this. What if you think that this is a reasonable conclusion that I draw in my book? The social caste of the future will be composed of two groups, which we shall designate as Neo-New humans and Neanderthalic humans. As the Neo-humans will be physically and intellectually superior to the Neo-humans, they will occupy the most important positions in society and govern the affairs of state. Because they are unwilling or unable to evolve, Neo-humans will be viewed with contempt, the vestigial refuse of human evolution, and ultimately eliminated from the social body. And you and I were talking yesterday about, we're already sort of seeing this reality unfold on a much lesser scale with the coronavirus vaccines, with the mandates and so forth. And I was watching a video today, and I caught a quick clip of a guy talking about something to do with the vaccines, and he referred to people who refused to take the vaccine as plague rats. I mean, that's pretty despicable. That you would that you would consider other people who make a personal medical choice that many of them likely made with their doctors, that those people would be referred to as plague rats and looked at as plague rats. And I know that people might say that's just hyperbole. I'm telling you, that's the way a lot of people on the left view the unvaccinated right now, literally as plague rats, as vermin.
Oh, yeah.
So, and this is just, and we're just talking about a leaky vaccine, right? We're just talking about a leaky vaccine for a mostly mild illness for most people, for the vast majority of the populace, right? Certainly not deadly for the vast majority of the populace. Where are we going to be when you have a faction of society who I denominate as humans, Neanderthalic humans, who refuse to evolve and who are seen as the refuse of evolution, a drag on the societal and biological evolution of the human species. The vitriol that is going to be aimed at these people, we're seeing the beginning of it right now. We're getting just a brief glimpse of the vitriol, of the hostility that's in store for people in the future, maybe my kids, maybe my grandkids, maybe my great-grandkids, who elect to remain human, who elect to remain Homo sapien, who don't want to evolve, who don't want to relinquish the trademarks that make them human, genetic and otherwise, and psychological, everything that make us human. These people, and I say these people again, these might be our kids or our grandkids or our great-grandkids. These people will not be able to compete in university. They probably won't even be allowed in the university. They won't be able to have positions of authority in government or important positions in corporations because they simply won't be able to compete. They won't be hooked up to Neuralink. They won't be interfacing with the internet with their brains. They won't have the enhancement upgrades, the cybernetic upgrades, or the genetic upgrades. What happens to that group of people in the future?
Yeah, and going back to the notion of bio-eugenics versus cultural eugenics, that's really where you see the fusion, right? The technological aspect is seen as an extension of the biological, and therefore technological advantage is in essence, an evolutionary advantage. And Homo Deus, the book Yuval Noah Harari, that was one of the dire warnings that he puts forth, and I agree, with the possibility of it for sure. And I especially agree with your comparison with the current, vax mandate drive. It really does give you an insight into what sort of mentality drives the medical authorities and the governments who enforce their dictates, and the universities and corporations who enforce their dictates. And, it shows that regardless of demonstrable failures in their technological system to live up to its promises, in this case, the mRNA gene therapy, it shows their defiance of public will. It shows their cruelty, especially in regard to their kind of their cultural foot soldiers, the kind of people who would call you a plague rat for not having a vaccine. And it shows just in general the arrogance that they have, and the inability to see how flawed ultimately their perfect system is and always will be. I oftentimes say I'm not worried about the Matrix. I'm worried about idiocracy. It's in the attempt to create a perfect world that things really go wrong. And in the case of the vaccine, people's livelihoods have been crushed. There are all sorts of cities across America and certainly across the world where you literally can't participate in society unless you have your papers or your QR code to prove that you've had your immune system upgraded.
And that is in fact a step in this direction, because you can't participate in society. And thank God that there's a lot of pushback against this now. They didn't get as far as they wanted to get. And by them, I mean the globalists who want to push the Great Reset. We're already seeing that you can't participate in society in Australia, for example, and in Canada and in other parts of
New York and L.A.
Or New York
and
L.A. Exactly.
Chicago.
You can't participate in society. You can't go to a restaurant. You can't, in some cases, go to school, go to university. And go about the menial tasks of your life, of your everyday life, unless you inject a pharmaceutical into your body. If that isn't the first step on this road to this new caste system, then I don't know what is. It certainly is. And people make the argument, well, you got to have these vaccines to go to school, right? You got to get the what are they called? The measles,
like
mumps,
the MMR
vaccine to go to school and so forth. But this is unprecedented. The way that these vaccines were the way that they were rushed, the way that they're being pushed on us. I mean, we've never seen this kind of propagandizing for anything else ever.
You know, one other parallel that comes to mind, and it's something, you know, I am a bit of a Luddite, and I am a bit nostalgic, but in order to succeed in a university system, you really aren't going to be able to do so without a laptop, and you're not going to be able to succeed without competency in some of the most basic technologies that you're required to use: email, web search, journal, you know, other sort of database search engines, word processors, things like this. Now, look, I use a word processor. I use all those things. But I think that the push in universities towards using technologies to mediate the educational process, and in particular, the push towards e-learning, pure e-learning, where students are using, you know, from home their laptops to study material through, you know, videoed lectures, or, you know, some of the more, you know, kind of tacky choose your own adventure study programs. Now, if you decide tomorrow that you want to study, you know, or a young man, a young woman wants to study in the traditional mode with face-to-face lectures and education, person-to-person mentorship, you know, reading books deeply, using paper and pencil. It's not that these things are outlawed. It's just that if you decide that you want to use some sort of traditional mode, you might as well try to look for schools in the Amish communities or something like that. You're not going to make it. And it's sort of de facto, and it's really a matter of both your ability to survive in a society that's evolving around you, but it's also a matter of status. I know from using a flip phone that, you know, there are a lot of people who look down upon this flip phone and wonder what's wrong with you, what drugs you're selling. And it's really like a fine phone, fine new iPhone is a status symbol that shows that you not only have the wealth to procure one, but you have the sort of, you know, tech savvy, you have the acumen to use one, right? Like you have all these new abilities and powers with your shiny new iPhone. Now, all this might seem kind of mundane and trivial, but I really don't. I think the idea that you're driving at, this sort of technocratic elite that employs advanced technology and both against the population or just simply for themselves, so that they then move up and away from, you know, the kind of standard baseline population. I think that that's already happening, and it's already happening in meaningful ways. But, you know, as far as a brain chip, you know, we'll see what happens. If I imagine that the infections alone will probably reduce the status of brain chips. But
this is where you talk about brain chips, but then when you add in the nanotechnology to repair,
so I think, yeah, sure.
Damage,
I think it just depends on, you know, which one. Like, I really think already you have, you know, no parent wants to have a child with Down syndrome. And now it's very easy to identify Down syndrome and abort the baby beforehand. The whole concept of liberal eugenics really is driven by legal and readily available abortions, so that you can do genetic testing or other testing beforehand, and you kind of actively cull the gene pool. Same with neuroenhancements of various sorts. I think that the non-invasive brain-computer interfacing will become first very popular, and then in many cases, at first it will be like probation, and in prisons it will be mandatory. You will have to subject to non-invasive, either transcranial magnetic, detection or stimulation, depending on how far it goes. But all of these technologies are on the cusp. I mean, right now you have non-invasive, both brain scanners and also stimulators, which are used for various purposes. They're fairly rare, but they're readily available if you've got the money and the desire for them. And I think that you're going to see that spread dramatically. And, even like robotics, like right now, if you go to someone's home and they don't have a dishwasher, they don't have a refrigerator, they don't have any of these technologies, obviously you immediately are like, either what's wrong with you mentally, or are you poor? Unless you come to my house, and then you just know it's because I'm a Luddite. I have a refrigerator, by the way. I think smart technologies will slowly but surely, they already are in many ways, but slowly but surely they'll creep into kind of normal middle class life, like you're saying, and it will largely be driven by status. Right now, the vaccine, you remember the vaccine, it really is an amazing microcosm. At the beginning, it was a status symbol. You chose to roll your sleeve up. You took your picture with your card. You've got your Band-Aid. You give it the thumbs up. And everybody was really proud of themselves for being vaxxed, and everybody was shaming everyone who was not vaxxed. And now it moved very rapidly in less than a year to, if you're not vaccinated, you can't go to the university, you can't go to the bar, you can't go to the theater, you can't get on the plane in some places, you can't get on the train in some places, like Australia, you can't leave your home. So, to the extent that's a microcosm, you can imagine it 1,000 different ways, but it's not hard to foresee a day in 10 years even, or 20 years, in which certain concessions to the techno culture will be required in order to participate in, or especially to advance in society. And it's already underway, and those extremes, I think, are definitely going to appear sooner than later.
There are some 10,000 or more genetic disorders in the gene pool of the human species. We now know that through genetic modification, specifically using CRISPR-Cas9 technology, that we can eliminate some of these, certain kinds of heart disease and so forth. We're already seeing the success with CRISPR-Cas9, and CRISPR-Cas9 it's a rudimentary tool. It's not the best we have. We're developing things that I think are going to be much more powerful. You and I have talked in the past about human artificial chromosomes that DARPA was developing years ago, and I think we can assume that they probably made some headway since the beginning of that project. And human artificial chromosomes, unlike CRISPR-Cas9, which is very finite, you can go in and you can snip certain parts of DNA, any DNA. You can go in and snip and make small insertions. Whereas a human artificial chromosome, you can go in and affect much larger segments of the DNA, maybe groups of genes together, because genes don't just work independently, they work as a collective. Our genome is much more complex, I think, than we originally thought. But the point is this, with all these genetic disorders floating around in the gene pool, what happens when we start to use genetic technology, genetic modification, to start to weed some of these out of the gene pool? And you can have human to human gene therapy, where you take somebody has a defective gene that's mutated, and you go and you take the same gene from somebody who has the correct copy of that gene, and you splice it in, and basically it's human to human. You are correcting the human genome with a portion of the human genetic code. But what happens when we start to get a little bit more chimeric with our gene splicing, and we start realizing that certain animals have certain genes that are very useful to humans, and that we can splice into our genome to correct some of these genetic disorders. Remember, there's probably much more than 10,000 genetic disorders floating around, mutations floating around the human gene pool. So what's my point? My point is this. You're going to have a group of people at some point in the future. And again, we're just talking about genetics right now. We're just talking about the genetic technology, discarding all the rest of the technologies that are growing, that are developing in tandem with the genetic technologies. What happens when you and I, as the Luddites that we are, or our children, say, you know what? I don't want to have a raccoon gene spliced into my genome to get rid of this genetic disorder in the human gene pool. Well, we're going to be looked at as the propagators of that disorder. We are the plague rats. We're going to be going around propagating our genes. This gets right back to eugenics, because I can envision a time in which they say to people like us, or our children, or our grandchildren, okay, fine, you don't have to get this genetic upgrade. You don't have to fix this part of the genome that's causing this genetic disorder in the collective gene pool of the human species. Fine. That's fine. But you're not allowed to have children. You're not allowed to propagate. We've already seen it. We just came through the 20th century, right? We just saw that unfold with Nazi Germany. And we're seeing the enthusiasm right now, this enthusiasm by mostly people on the left to segregate us from society, those of us who don't want to elect not to be vaccinated, to ostracize us, to what were they saying in the media? It's time to shame these people.
Yes.
And believe me that if this is, again, let's remind ourselves, this is all of this is happening. This is all revolving around a virus that is 98% survivable for most people. What happens when we're dealing with heart disease? What happens when we're dealing with cancer? What happens when we're dealing with other terminal illnesses that are in the gene pool? And that if we don't get the genetic upgrades, the genetic enhancements, then we're going to continue to propagate these disorders in the human collective, in the collective gene pool. That's not science fiction. I keep saying this because it's true. It's not science fiction. It's coming. And if we think that these people are losing their minds over a virus and a vaccine, just wait until the implications are much weightier, are much grander. Implications for the whole species, for the development of the species, the eradication of genetic disorders.
There's a really good example. It's a parallel, right? That shows that intention to perfect or improve human beings through technology. And while it's not genetic, it's phenotypic in nature, it gives you an idea of the lengths that certain technocratic-minded people are willing to go to. And it's a program called 1,000 Days. It's funded by a group, an NGO, Welcome Group is the group. Welcome Leap is the initiative. And they've poured money into a ton of different experimental laboratories to try to find these kind of quasi-transhumanist procedures to improve human life. It's always to improve human life, including the rapid development of mRNA vaccines. But in this particular one, the first 1,000 days, basically the procedure is to fit infants with sensors all over their bodies, in these little kind of, cyber pajamas, and monitor their movements, monitor the sounds that they make, monitor their attention, where their eyes are looking, all of this. And the purpose is, the first 1,000 days, this kind of one person surveillance system is intended to go on for about 3 years, and like a little mini Truman Show. And the purpose is to gauge the neurological development of the executive function, the control center and prefrontal cortex. And it's intended to help children who typically wouldn't have the self-control of an ideal child, to help them develop executive function. And, the first wave is to get, to be able to make a really good model in silico of the brain, of the child's brain. That model will be used in all of these models of all the children will be used in the aggregate to both create a more detailed map of the brain as it develops, in particular the executive function, but also, secondarily, to develop better artificial intelligence systems by having better maps of a developing mind, because artificial intelligence is, as we spoke about, as you said many times, artificial intelligence is a mind, and kind of infant mind in development as it is right now. So going back to the babies, though, the idea is that you will take all of these infants in the aggregate, and you'll identify those who are having trouble developing executive function, and those who are not, and you will construct a sort of digital benchmark towards which children are going to be encouraged to progress towards. And the implication is, in the proposal itself, they said 80% of children. If we can get to 80% of children and stop, the stunted development of the executive function, then we will have succeeded. I don't know if they mean, they weren't clear. Did they mean 80% of children within a certain population in the UK where Welcome Group is based? Or do they mean 80% of children worldwide? I don't know. All I know is that any normal person would balk at the notion of having their baby fitted with sensors to develop their cognitive function, for more than a week, let's say, right? We're talking about steady monitoring for 3 years. And, so on the one hand, it shows the complete disconnection, the kinds of people who develop these programs. Regina Dugan is at the head of this, by the way, former DARPA, former Google, former Facebook, World Economic Forum connected. And, it shows the disconnect they have for normal people who simply just want to hold their babies and hope for the best. And the insistence on control. And, you talk about like, well, what if you have, a mutation that they've detected, and you're about to have a child, and they're like, oh, well, there's a chance that your child won't develop, proper executive function due to this certain mutation that tends towards, stunted prefrontal cortex development. Well, I don't know. Nobody really knows. It depends really on public sentiment. Nobody really knows how long it's going to be before that sort of thing is so fiercely discouraged that you're kind of like carted off and given an abortion and brought back and like good luck trying again. But certainly, you look at social services as they exist now for poorer people. Or if you look at, the sort of like the corporate life coach sort of sector where people are trying to sell you the means to your perfect life, I really don't see it being that far off the mark that some number of people within the next 5 to 10 years are, pressured into or subjected to something like that. Maybe not that in particular, but, you will be seen as a freak, and your children will be seen as freaks if you are averse to constant surveillance. You'll be seen as freaks if you eschew the sort of bio-digital convergence that you see just with the standard smartphone now, or whatever the next level may be. And as technology improves, as it's shown to be beneficial in some ways, and as it kind of aggregates, I don't see it being too far off. There's no way to predict the exact contours, but I think that the general thesis that we're moving towards a future in which a technocratic elite is given, to a greater or lesser degree, godlike powers over the rest of us, and the rest of us are expected to adhere to pretty much any technological paradigm that's put on us, in order to be accepted as just peons, let alone to be, to move up in the ranks. And in fact, as mentioned with, just digital technology in schools, or if you look at the way in which Silicon Valley controls both corporate life and governmental life and personal life in America and around the world now, it's already there. It's just a matter of how extreme that division will be and how, really sci-fi oriented the technologies will be that are used by these elites, or the technologies we're expected to subject ourselves to.
Well, that's sounding a whole lot like the Book of Revelation and the Mark of the Beast.
Doesn't it, though?
Let me end this this conversation, Joe, with another quote from your article. And this is a quote from Max Moore. "Join me, join Lucifer, and join Extropy in fighting God and his entropic forces with our minds, our wills, and our courage. Reality is fundamentally on our side. Forward into the light." Joe, where can people find you? How do people get connected with you? Where can people access these amazing articles you've been writing?
Well, the first place to look, warroom.org, hit the transhumanism tab. There is a decent collection of some of the more essential pieces that I've done. You can find some of the more current work at joebot.xyz. That's joebot.xyz, or my social media, Twitter and Gitter at joebotxyz.
Follow Joe on social media. Read his articles; they're excellent. And follow the War Room with Steve Bannon. I mean, it's the most.
I should definitely say, War Room Pandemic with Steve Bannon. Every week, you'll find me on there 2-3 times a week. So.
I watch you guys almost every day. I think Bannon's got some of the most insightful political analysis out there. So if you're not following the War Room Pandemic, go follow the War Room Pandemic. Okay, we're going to wrap it, Joe. Thanks a lot for coming on. I really appreciate your time.
Yeah, Timothy, it's been fantastic. Thank you very much.
Come join me and Joe Ellen in Nashville, Tennessee from the 6th through the 7th of May at the Birthright Conference, where we will be delving even deeper into the topic of transhumanism and other associated topics, such as aliens, UFOs, and Bible prophecy. Tickets to the conference are now on sale at a 20% discount. Hurry over to my website, timothyalberino.com, or follow the link in the description of this video to secure your tickets today.